I'm Granny, and today's episode is going to be a story about my family, specifically my dad. He was really intelligent, interesting, great sense of humor, and he had absent minded professor tendencies when he would get involved in a project. He would lose track of time, space, everything. Had a great sense of humor. And when we would go camping, we referred to him as Robinson Crusoe because he was always coming up with these interesting cooking devices. He took us on great adventures, really fun swings, and the adventures at one time included a bear cave. When my dad was in his mid teens, he would go out and catch wild mustangs, train them, and then sell them for extra money. And the mustangs came from the conquistadors when they showed up in 1492 down in, well, you know where. They brought horses with them, and often those horses would get away and create herds, and those herds started migrating into North America, and over the centuries, the horses would be bought and sold and traded by the Comanches, the Apaches, the Utes, Shoshone, and tribes across the Great Plains. So there were several herds of wild mustangs in the area that my dad lived. And you could also call my dad a horse whisperer. He was very gentle, soft spoken, and he was offended by the term breaking a horse because he did not believe that by abusing an animal you would create loyalty in that animal. He believed horses and humans are best treated kindly until trust is developed. And then after trust, loyalty. Because when you have gained a horse's trust, it then turns into loyalty and they will do anything for you. And you can say the same about humans. I was taught that if a horse or a dog doesn't warm up to a human, you'd best not warm up to that human either. So after doing his chores, he would head out on his horse looking for the herds, and often they were found in the foothills of the Chiricahua Mountains. He was successful, or when he was successful, he would lead the horse home and begin the process of gaining its trust. At this time, those searching to catch these horses noticed a particularly beautiful filly, and there were several people trying to catch this filly. She was really intelligent. It was hard to corner her, and so she ran wild for quite a long time. My dad would go out and study her and her habits, and eventually he caught her. And once he did, once she was at the end of that rope, he realized he was going to have a huge challenge getting her home. Because normally he would get off his horse and work his way closer and closer to the horse and then start feeding the horse sugar cubes that he always kept in his shirt pocket. Well, with her, that wouldn't work. She would never let him get close to her. So, and when he tried to get back on his horse, she got crazy. So then he got off the horse, stayed on the ground, and that way she was more settled. And yeah, he kept trying to get closer to her, and then after a while he gave up because he was afraid of her getting so upset that she could hurt herself. So, growing up, my dad always kept sugar cubes in his pockets. And whenever he went out to the horses, he never chased a horse because he always had sugar cubes in his pocket, and they would come to him. And they would snuffle around and trying to check out where the sugar cubes are. So, anyway, back to this filly. He ended up naming her Chimaka, and it took him forever to get home because she would never let him get closer to her. So he had to stay at the end of that long rope. And so when he had to cross ranches, he would open the gate, have to walk her in a huge circle to get back to the gate to close the gate. And he had to do that several times to finally get home, which they did. And it took a long time to train her. But once she did, or once Dad did, and once she became loyal to Dad, they were never separated again. The only time they were separated was when my dad was in the Air Force during World War II as a pilot. It did take him longer to train her than any other, but that was only because she was really intelligent. So Chimaka gave Dad several colts, and the last horse he owned was one of her great-grandsons. And there's another story associated with the Mustangs. After Dad was diagnosed with cancer, I would visit him with a video camera so that he could share his family stories and stories about his life, being in the Air Force, being in World War II. We would often laugh until we cried, and then sometimes we just cried. So one of the last stories he shared with me was an experience that he had when he was still catching mustangs. One Saturday, after completing his chores, he left to search for mustangs. He came home late that night, fed and brushed his horse, and was walking back to his house, and he describes that he almost tripped over his mom. She was out in the dark doing laundry. That is when he realized that he had left the house before hauling water for his mom, starting a fire, and starting heating up the water. Because she did all the laundry with an old washboard. And if you've never seen one of those, you need to look up a picture of that. My dad came from a family of 8 living children. A boy and a girl had died in infancy. So imagine doing laundry for 5 boys wearing jeans. So if you've ever hand washed jeans, you probably know what he was referring to. He vowed that day that he would get a real job and buy his mom a washing machine, which he did. He got a job at the Douglas Smelter and bought his mom a washer with his first check. When Dad shared this story, he cried, still hurting from what he had done to his mom. We all have regrets from our youth, and I'm hoping that this story will cause you to reconsider your choices, maybe. Consider thinking carefully when you do make choices, because there are always consequences. Thanks for letting me share this story with you. Join me for another episode of A Family Memory and When Granny Goes Down the Rabbit Hole.